Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, December 4th, 2018 at 6:30 in the McAuliffe Hearing Room at the Townhouse. Good evening and welcome. First order of agenda is appointment of Lori Lavoli as Building Commissioner, term 6/30/21. Mr. Purple.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lori, do you want to come up to the presentation table? Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the board, as you know, there's a memo in the packet. I'll briefly review this. Obviously, the previous building commissioner, Mark Robideau, resigned and has moved on to other places. And so we posted the position. We ran through an interview process. Mrs. Hale and also Chief Morrow also assisted in that process. And I then conducted final interviews with additional input from the finance director, from Brian Ballantyne. Based on all the conversations and the people that I had the good fortune to meet with, I respectfully requested the board vote to appoint Lori Lavoli as Southborough's next building commissioner. I'm not going to review some of the things that I talked about. I'm going to give her an opportunity just to introduce herself to the board. But I will say that she has a great skill set. She is the current president of the Building Commissioners Association for the state. Sometimes that's a thankless job, and it's next person up in that, but she is the head of the association. She's very knowledgeable. She's very strong with customer service, and I think she's going to make a great fit in our team, and she is, again, my recommendation for your appointment this evening. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Lavoli if you just want to give a little bit of background to the board as to what brought you here.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Lori Lavoli. I am, thank you for considering me for, or appointing me building commissioner. My background is currently the building commissioner in the town of Concord, where I've been for 12 plus years, and prior to that I was a building local inspector in the town of Acton. I currently do the zoning enforcement. We do sign enforcement and building code. I also go to all the zoning board of appeal meetings and deal with all the zoning complaints also, enforcement letters. Further on back, my background is architecture and construction management. I've worked in the fields and been out on the sites. I've also worked as a clerk of the works for a public safety building in the town of Acton when I was there, as well as the local inspector. I really like to be out with the people, talking to the people, helping people, either out in the field, in the office, as much as I can do. It's all a learning process for all of us. We're all as many eyes as we can get to get the job done. I think that's maybe it, unless there's any other questions.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I just have one quick question
Sure.
for you before I turn it over to the board. Is being the zoning code enforcement officer. So what do you envision that to entail? I know there's been some question on things in the past on exactly what it entails. I just kind of like your vision on what you think. Is that enforcing decisions, or do you feel that may not be within the purview of the zoning code enforcement
No, I think
officer?
it's definitely within the purview of the zoning enforcement officer, as well as any permitting that comes in to make sure it's a conforming lot, to make sure it doesn't have, wetlands and/or an historic location. Also, any complaints that may come in that are part of the bylaw, ranging from, I know there's a fencing bylaw here, to junk storage or something to that effect. Researching it, making sure and it is or is not a violation, and following through with that. I usually follow up with a letter, a visit to see if it's a valid or not valid, and anything for a ZBA decision, any conditions that are entailed, whether it's prior to building permit, making sure those are all with every department completed, all the way through occupancy. they've received as-built if required, or any other conditions, landscaping, et cetera, that are required. And no occupancies issued or following through with a temporary if needed.
Great, thank you. You certainly answered my question.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate that. I think your qualifications are outstanding. I think Southborough would be very fortunate to have you. I like that your background is somewhat similar to the atmosphere that we have here in Southborough as far as the importance of open space, as well as economic development. So I was very impressed with your resume. So again,
you.
thank you for applying. I think you'll be a wonderful asset to the town.
Thank you. I look forward
Any
to
other
it.
member? Mr. Schifrin.
I agree. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Why leave Raglan, and how long do you plan on being here?
I plan on being here as long as you'll have me. At least 3 years, right? And what was the first part of the question? Why did I?
Why leave?
Why am I leaving?
Yeah.
Just very different reasons. On a personal level, looking for something a little different. I want to be back in, being out in the field a lot more and being involved in all aspects from the beginning to the end, not just all paperwork.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Welcome again.
Thank you.
Question for you. We have projects, the town itself has projects, and department heads could really use the resource early on to see that our projects are ADA compliant. We have a new ADA committee that's up and active, and they're really maneuvering themselves. How would you address the ADA compliance with town government projects?
As a building department, we enforce the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board. I have met with the Disability Committee in Concord, and just try to. A lot of the regulations are similar, but they are different. A lot of it to work with ADA is more of a civil matter, but always work through to find out if there's a solution as how to make something better, or guide them on which way they should go, either to the state or to an owner. A lot of it's owner.
Did you receive the complaints?
I was not the ADA
Coordinator? Okay.
no. I do receive some, and some when they have questions, when they do go to the state, to the Access Board. And I work really closely with the Access Board director.
Who would you suggest would be the responsible party for addressing the complaints?
As far as under an ADA,
Yes.
I have no problem following through to find out.
Well, you're the
what to do.
enforcement agent, so I'm not sure.
I know,
who would
it's
be the
hard, it's
appropriate-
hard, right. It varies. It's been the assistant town manager and the couple of last towns that I've been familiar with. And it is it's a hard job. If you have a committee, I think it makes it
Right.
a little bit easier to get that. And that chair has been following through with the state, as far as I am.
I would urge you to continue that discussion with the committee and give them
Sure.
guidance,
Yeah, that's not a
or make
problem.
yourself available if requested, because they're really trying to get ahead of a lot of the projects into this town. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't have any questions myself. Again, very impressed with the resume that you
Thank
have
you.
and your background and experience, and I think you're going to do a great job here in Southborough.
Thank you.
Thanks for the interest in the position.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Madam Chair, and same welcome.
Thank you.
And I liked how when you mentioned customer service. I think that is going to be a key component of your responsibilities here. And I look forward to welcoming you and working with you in the town. And Madam Chair, I would move that we appoint Lori Lavoli as Building Commissioner, term 6/30/21.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, welcome.
Thank you very
Welcome.
much.
Great.
Look forward to it.
And the next item on the agenda, interview for volunteer appointments. Thomas L. Collins to Economic Development Committee. Mr. Collins, if you wouldn't mind stepping up, sir, thank you. Welcome. Thank you for stepping forward and volunteering for an open position in the town. It's greatly appreciated. If you could just give us a little bit of background on what you do and why you're interested in economic development, that would be great.
So I have a 40-year background in commercial real estate. I've done acquisition, disposition. I've helped people get debt for their projects. I've helped people get equity for their projects. I've helped people sell their projects. For 20 years, I ran Cushman & Wakefield's New England region and retired from that in 2014. I established my own business doing coaching, executive coaching and mentoring the last couple of years. And I also serve as the chairman of the board of the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance. And I just happened to be on the website, and I got an email looking for help with a number of committees, and that one seemed like a good fit for me.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you again for stepping forward.
Sure.
Any other members? Mrs. Fanoff?
Just a question. Have you attended any of their meetings?
No.
Are you aware that they take place usually in the morning? Are your availability?
I was not aware of that, but I work out of my house, so I can
Okay,
try to fit my clients around the meetings.
okay, thank you.
And where do they meet? Here?
Generally,
Typically.
yes.
Generally, okay.
Yeah, generally they try to meet, I think, at 7:45 in the morning,
Oh, that's
last
easy.
for an hour, hour and a half, and
Any other questions, comments? All
Madam
right.
Chair, I would move that we appoint Mr. Collins to the EDC for a term of 6/30/19.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Welcome, sir.
Sir, thank you for
Thank you very much.
volunteering.
Thank you. You'll get a letter, and you'll get sworn in by the town clerk within 15 days.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
He's still downstairs, actually, if you want to get sworn in today. Oh, there's no letter yet, okay.
Excuse me. Next up, Thomas L. Marculier, I don't know if I'm saying that right, to Southborough Housing Opportunity Partnership Committee, term 6/30/19. Sir, welcome.
Thank you.
Again, I'll kind of throw the same question at you, if you could give us a little bit of your background and why you were interested in SHOPSI.
Sure. So
Thank you.
my name's Tom Marculier. I've been in town for 20-plus years. And now that my kids are grown up, I do have a lot more time and energy to do other things. And one of the other things is volunteer for a committee. And you're probably saying, why this one? My children, two of my children volunteered for St. Matthew's, Mississippi trip. And they came back, I think, better people for that, helping people, a little bit less fortunate than they are. And I think it's time that, maybe the father steps up a little bit and also help out in the local community here with the affordable housing. So I know it sounds kind of corny, but, deep down, I think that's one of the reasons why, out of all the committees, this one I feel like I can contribute and hopefully give opportunities to other families to raise their children in a town like Southborough.
Well, I think that was an outstanding answer. So, not corny in any way, but again, thank you for stepping forward. I know sometimes it's not easy with the time constraints, and greatly appreciated. Open it up to the board.
If I may?
Mrs. Fanoff.
Madam Chair, as a member of SHOPSI, the chair did bring it to our attention that Mr. McCullough was interested in this position, and we took the position that we were hoping that he would step forward, take the next step before the Board of Selectmen for appointment, so thank you.
Any other comments?
No, I'd just say, we've seen it a few times now, people that, almost in that same position where kids grown, but to take that time to want to give back to the community, to get involved. I particularly appreciate that. At a time in your life when maybe it'd be easier to do more for yourself, it's good that you're stepping up and giving back to the community, so thank you for doing that.
Madam Chair, I will agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that was one of the best responses to a question as to why that I've ever heard. Mr. Marculier would welcome you to the committee and would move that we appoint Mr. Marculier to the Southborough Housing Opportunity Partnership Committee with a term 6/30/19.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Welcome, sir.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
sir.
Very appreciated. Excuse me. Next up, Catherine McKee, Trails Committee, update on committee activities. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Catherine McKee, the Trails Committee Chair, and we're here to give a few updates about what the Trails Committee has been up to for the last couple years. I first want to thank the board for having us during a really busy season. We understand there's a lot going on, but hopefully this little sidetrack will be fun, little adventure on the trails for you. So first I want to tell a little story. The other week I was speaking with one of our committee members, Sati, about why he joined the Trails Committee. And he shared with me that he has a love of the outdoors and trails, and that stemmed from early childhood memories of when he was with his father taking walks on the trail. So when I think about the Trails Committee mission, I like to think of it beyond building trails and just maintaining trails, but providing and supporting opportunities for our Southborough families to share their love of the outdoors with their children and with their families, and to support opportunities to celebrate the Southborough's unique natural resources, the beautiful reservoirs we have, the open space and the trails, and supporting opportunities to teach our children about the importance of preserving our natural resources and to celebrate Southborough's history. We might not have the business space that our neighbors have, but we have a really unique reservoir, natural resources opportunity here, and we should celebrate that. And the Trails Committee is appreciative of the opportunity to support the community in developing their love of nature and the natural resources. So the board has an updated presentation. I've expanded a few of the slides because when you talk trails, you have to talk maps. So we needed a few extra ones, a few additional pictures. I understand time is sensitive, so I'll move fast through these, and if anyone has questions, we can connect after. So the bottom line on this slide that I'd like to hone in on is trails and open space are significant community assets. It helps make Southborough a better place to live. It increases walkability, improves quality of life. All of the surveys that the town has done, from the 2008 master plan, the 2016 open space recreation survey, and the EDC 2017 survey, all indicate residents want more trails, they want connectivity, and they appreciate that resource in town. So the Trails Committee sees themselves as helping the town, the board, and the town meet those goals. This map, and all of you on the Board of Selectmen have an 11 by 17 size. This is an all trails map. This is on our website. All of the different trails are highlighted here, some supported by Trails Committee, some by the Stewardship Committee, and other by the entities that own the properties. This PDF has hyperlinks, so you can download maps easily on the website to orient yourself to what's going on in Southborough. Here, I won't go through each trail, but it's a listing of all of our trails. The blue diamonds represent what the Trails Committee oversees. The red flag represents the Stewardship Committee, what they oversee, and then the other entities are listed here who is responsible for their land. Roughly, we have between 20 and 30 miles of trails established in Southborough. We'll start with the Sudbury Reservoir Trail just quickly. It starts on East Main Street and goes along the reservoir here, up to Deerfoot. This property is owned by DCR. It continues beyond Deerfoot, along the reservoir, and onto the Westboro town line. This is about 5 miles, one way. Then we have the Town Forest and Breakneck Hill. Town Forest is located off of Walnut Drive between Walnut and Woodland. It's about 3 miles of trails and 54 acres. Breakneck Hill, 90 acres, and again, about 3 miles of trail. And you can connect to the two entities, the two properties through Woodland Road. So new discovery, new to me, I should say. The 9/11 Loop Trail, I was approached on Heritage Day by a resident that said, did you know there's a trail behind the 9/11 field? I'm the Trails Committee chair, and I didn't know that. I've been a chair for almost a year now. So I went out, and sure enough, beautiful 1.4 mile loop around, most of this is an access road for DCR. It is open to the public, however, it's not permitted. But I did speak with DCR on Monday, and they're happy to open discussions to have us maintain these trails. It goes along to the Pine Point here and along the reservoir in a single track. It's well defined, it just needs some blazes and such. So we're in the process of adding that to our agreement with DCR. We have regional trails that connect through Southborough, the Burroughs Loop Trail, the Bay Circuit Trail, the Aqueduct Trail, and then we also have what's called the Metro West Land Line. And the land line is a network of existing trails. So it's not a new trail, it's just a connecting all the trails in the Metro West area. It's an initiative overseen by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Okay. The Burroughs Loop is a 30-mile loop that goes through Southborough, connecting all the boroughs. And essentially, it overlays on top of the Sudbury Reservoir Trail, with the exception of what we're calling the Peninsula Trail. Now, this is in permitting process. This is what would connect the two sections that are existing, the BCT and the SRT, Sudbury Reservoir and the Bay Circuit Trail. I'll talk a little more about that later. The Bay Circuit Trail runs from Kingston Bay to Plum Island, connecting 37 towns. The Southborough section runs off of Oak Hill Road and goes all the way up Nichols, Clemens, and to the town line. The Aqueduct Trail, again, overlays on top of the Sudbury Reservoir Trail, and then it connects to the Peninsula Loop. So that's two connections that this Peninsula Trail will help connect for regional trails. And again, the Metro West Land Line is just a network of trails that exist. So the Trails Committee partners with Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Many of our projects are done by these partnerships, so we're really grateful for those relationships. And I just want to highlight a few really important ones that have been done over the past few years, so I'll kind of move fast through these, but you can visit our website. They're all detailed here. So Alex Flynn did an amazing job on his historical marker project. It was the first of its kind in Southborough, highlighting the history of the Burnett House. It's overlooking the Sudbury Reservoir Trail, and he did some trail improvements, added a bench, and dedicated it to a loyal trail steward. So this was an amazing project done by one of our Eagle Scouts in July of this year. Last winter wasn't our friend for the trails. We had a lot of blowdowns, and we had 4 major sections that were blocked on the Sudbury Reservoir Trail. And as you can see these before and after pictures, there were significant blockages. So the Trails Committee partnered with Troop 92 on National Trails Day, and we cleared them all up. On Earth Day, we sponsored Rotary Club's annual Earth Day event, and what this provided was families with kids that didn't want to walk on the sides of the road had the opportunity to go on trails and clean. The good news is most of our trails are pretty clean. However, on sides of the road, as you can see here on Northborough Road, not so much, and there's some sections of the trail that needs cleanup, especially along the water on Route 85 and some of the other reservoirs, so we'll target that in the future. This project, the footbridge, was done in 2017. As you can see, this was the crossing before the footbridge. Very dangerous, unsafe, near the Faith School athletic field. This is now the bridge that exists. This was an Eagle Scout project. These Eagle Scouts all raise funds, so it's not town money. That's the beauty of the partnerships that we have established over the years. The Girl Scouts did an amazing project on the Sudbury Reservoir Trail where they did trailblazing and GPS mapping, and they did a Hike Southborough Day, guided hikes. They were awarded an award from SOLF for their efforts, and they really engaged the community. This was a wonderful event in 2017. Back in 2016, another Eagle Scout installed stairs along Route 30, and the committee worked with DPW to open the guardrail. And as you can see, this is a really steep hill, so these stairs were really necessary, and we need them on the other side as a future project also. A couple of other Eagle Scouts, we had Mitchell Hill did some blazing and some trail widening and clearing, and then another Eagle Scout back in 2015 installed the measured mile on the Sudbury Reservoir Trail. 2018 has been a really busy year for the Trails Committee. We created a new brochure, which all of the board have a copy of, and it's also will be listed on our website. We rolled out a new program called Adopt a Trail, where we invite families to participate, adopt a section of a trail, and they're our eyes and ears, letting us know what's happening on the trails. Are there any down trees, any maintenance required? And they're encouraged to post pictures on our Facebook page as a way to engage them and their family and the community. We hosted a BWALT presentation by Don Byrne. We have a new website, all updated maps. We're in the process of developing videos to help the community realize what assets we have in town. We created a new Facebook page to improve outreach and awareness. And we're leveraging our resources with, or our relationships rather, with mysouthborough.com and other media outlets to increase awareness about trail happenings and let people know what the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts are doing in our trails. So as I mentioned earlier, this is what we're calling the Peninsula Trail. It's off of Route 30 near Central Street and Stony Brook. This is MWRA's facility near the Fayetteville Dam. This is an established access road. Most of the property is owned by DCR. A small portion is by MWA. We are in the permitting process now. It's about 1.6 miles of trail, and it's an established access road. So it's not a lot of work. We do have to raise some funding with grants and CPA application perhaps and some donations in order to fence some infrastructure that's in there that DCR requires us to do. The brilliance of this trail, it's located in a really quiet section of town. It's beautiful. There's a lot of wildlife back there. So when this opens up to the public, it's going to be a really well-used trail. And this section is paved. There's a half-mile of paved road, an opportunity to be fully accessible to all people with disabilities. And I've spoken with the ADA committee. I've spoken with DCR. DCR is open to having discussions about making that ADA compliant, which requires some parking, and they're happy to have that discussion. So that's great news. We just found that out on Monday. Here's a couple pictures of the Peninsula Trail. This is the paved section. Here's the unpaved, and as you can see, it's really wide. Not a lot of brush clearing needed, and this is a beautiful picture of the reservoir. So with the trail, we have some connection issues, and I'm not going to go into much detail here, but we have some challenges on the Southborough Framingham line, crossing over this bridge. As you can see, there's not a lot of room. And then on the Route 30 causeway. So right now, the maps have to stop showing the trail, and they show a proposed trail. So we have a couple of options. One, we could string a rope from side to side and let people ferry themselves over with a boat. Or we could hang a zip line, and that would be a lot of fun for residents. Or we could build a footbridge across. Those are a few options we're considering. Now, one option, if this has been approached before, this causeway runs parallel to this Route 30 causeway. It's the CSX Railroad. The Trails Committee has approached CSX. There is no permission that will be granted for access, but as you can see, it's a two-lane railroad track with only one railroad. So there's a lot of space. There's about 12 feet here, and you see Mario has no problem running the trails, but people are using it now, so it may come under new ownership, and that might provide some new opportunities for us to explore using the causeway, which would be a great asset to the town. So again, quickly, not a lot of room on Route 30. Next steps, we'll be meeting with Mass DOT, and MAPC is coordinating that meeting with Framingham to see what solutions we can come up with. Potential trail projects, basically what we're working on is blazing some trails, making them more accessible. There's a few trail build-outs, things like that, and ongoing maintenance of the different trails. So here I just want to highlight again, trails and open space are significant community assets. Helps make Southborough a better place to live. It enhances property values, which improves the tax base. Attracts homebuyers, improves the tax base. Attract visitors, increased patronage to local businesses. The master town plan goal is you want to create opportunities for future generations of residents to live and work here. Well, we can help you do that with trails and open space. I won't go into much here, but trails are trending. In the state level, Baker-Polito administration announced the Mass Trails program. There's approximately $5 million in matching grants to help build out open space and trails and recreation opportunities. Partnerships. We couldn't do what we do without all of you, the town, departments, boards, committees, state entities, community members, volunteers, local businesses, and Scout. So we appreciate everyone's effort in helping us do what we do. The committee members, you know me now. Satyendra Sati, he's our secretary. Dan Frank, former chair, founding member. Isabel Murphy, Louisa Vargas, and we work closely with Doreen Ferguson of the Recreation Department. Key takeaways, trails and open space bring great value to Southborough. It's said in all the residents have spoken with all of the surveys. The committee needs the Board of Selectmen and the town continued support to help maintain trails. And we're committed to continue to increase outreach and awareness, to increase our trail stewardship efforts, increase education opportunities for the community, engage the community, and continue to partner with other groups in town to leverage knowledge, resources, and networks. And we want the Board of Selectmen's suggestions. What's important to you? Let us know what you're looking at. And now, we want to know how many of you are on board to help us get to the next level. Show of hands would be great. No, thank you, and opening for questions.
Catherine, thank you very much. That was really a great presentation.
Thank you.
I'm actually, didn't realize all of the wonderful things that your committee is doing, and I applaud all of you that are here from your committee for your hard work and your dedication. Outstanding.
Thank you.
I do have a couple questions for you. You actually answered one. One of my questions was, in looking at the trails, I saw there seemed to be a lot of connectivity via roadway in some parts, and you've addressed that, so that's great. On the trails that the committee is steward over, are those cleared trails? Does your committee actually coordinate clearing the trails? How is the maintenance done
Yeah.
on the trails?
It's a good question and certainly a challenge, and it's all hands on deck. It's, the trail debris, the tree debris cleanup we did National Trails Day was all of the committee members getting out there with gloves and tools, partnering with Boy Scouts. There's not a formal maintenance plan, so we really rely on volunteers. We've made a lot of connections with community members that have said, I'm willing to help you, clear trails. So we're establishing a distribution list, an email list, to be able to say, hey, we're having a Trails Day cleanup, can you help? We do get support from the Recreation Department to help mow the trails. I think it happens between 2 and 4 years. And MWRA also does a mowing of the open channel trail, the Sudbury Reservoir Trail that goes towards the Westboro line. And they recently purchased another piece of equipment which allows them and will allow them to mow it twice a year. Because that's one of our challenges, is keeping the trails mowed along those sections. They really go thigh high for grass, and nobody wants to use the trails. So one of our next steps will be, how do we get more of that to happen on a more regular basis so the trails are open when people want to enjoy them.
So on the DCR trails, so DCR basically does the maintenance, maintaining, so obviously they have some type of relationship with the Trails Committee as far as if you find, on a walk, you find some trees down or something blocking the path on the DCR, MWRA land, who maintains that part? You do?
We do.
Okay.
We have formal agreements with DCR and MWRA, which states clearly the Trails Committee is responsible for maintenance. So we have reached out to DPW for really large trees that we can't handle, and they've been very gracious at helping us clear those. And we do a lot of the work ourselves as trying to leverage what we have without asking.
Okay, and one final question. I think it's great. I will first say I think it's great the work you're doing. I think it's great that you're getting the website up, and coming here also lets the public be more aware of what's going on and what they're doing. Your website, how would citizens that are interested access your website to get all of this information you shared with us tonight?
Great questions. So first, I can go to this next slide and let you know the website. So the website is on the town website. Tom helped us set that up earlier this year. It's southboroughtrails.org, and you'll be redirected to the town website. So you can either go to the departments, committees, trails, or type in that directly, and you'll be able to visit.
And one last question. How often do you envision, or do you do scheduled hikes now? For someone, a novice like myself,
Yeah.
that might be interested in doing the trails, but sometimes it's easier when
Yeah.
you're kind of guided through initially, so you know where you're going, where you shouldn't go, what you shouldn't do.
Absolutely, and certainly with some of our trails, it's not always clear. Like when I first started on Trails Committee, I was like, I gotta go find all the trails in Southborough. Well, it was kind of hard, and it's a small town, so I was like, oh, okay. And I hike mountains in New Hampshire, so kind of familiar with that stuff. So we're still working on making sure that the blazes are appropriately and the signage is there for everybody. But we've had some recommendations. Actually, Sam behind me made a comment that we could partner with some schools So I think the guided hike is a really good idea, something we can focus on in the next year and such. This year, we really focused on getting our maps and our blazing, getting the word out. So I think that's a great suggestion for a future plan. And we can work with the scouts. I think that's a wonderful way to partner with them. And have
Absolutely.
them help us lead some of those hikes.
Well, thank you again. I think you guys are doing tremendous, tremendous work.
Appreciate
And
it.
I open it to the board. Mrs. Faniff.
Great work.
Thank you.
It's nice to see what we didn't know come before us. Donations, I know we had this discussion as far as friends of the Trails Committee, or could we, if those of us would like to donate instead of cut trees,
Yeah.
could we donate to the Recreation Commission to benefit trails if people want to allocate it to the trails? You could manage that.
And I think the process, and correct me if I'm wrong, Doreen, is to indicate that donation specific for trails, blah, blah, so that it's earmarked for that.
You may want to put that on your website
Happy to do so, thank you.
as a
for the
suggestion. anyway. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, great presentation. Little bit disappointed that the cat is now out of the bag on the 9/11 trail.
Oh, you knew.
For advertising that. That was always, it was a great, no, it was always a great trail. I hike would drop my daughter off at lacrosse practice and go walk through that
Well,
with my
hopefully
youngest.
it's good advertising
It is,
and not
I'm
the
being
negative.
facetious as I
Yes,
say
yes.
that, so. The one other thing that I would just note, on the overall map that you have,
Yes,
the town did acquire a piece of property, just north of the pike.
The
between
Halloran property?
Rock Point, and,
Yes.
and I would encourage you to add that onto this.
Thank you,
Map as well.
yeah, so Freddie had, actually Beth, before she left, approached the Trails Committee about possibly working with, who oversees that, actually? Oversees that property? Is it gonna be Conservation Commission? Okay, so she had approached us, and I've spoken with Freddie Gillespie about, having some opportunity to work in that property. So it wasn't known that we could actually advertise that that was our land, so we're happy to add that to it. I want to caution us, if it's not publicly accessible right now, we might want to stage that communication so that we're not bringing people to a dead end.
No,
And-
exactly.
And I
We
think
had
there's an
actually-
access, because it is landlocked, so there might be some
Yeah.
opportunities to work through those challenges.
No, exactly. We had actually commented on that as we were purchasing the property. It's not all that far from the Finn School as well, so that would be a convenient place for parking, and then it's
Great.
just a short walk.
Yeah, we're very excited. I reached out to Freddie just so we could get a piece of that action, if you don't mind me getting excited about trails.
Very good.
Great.
And I just want to reiterate, I think your presentation was outstanding. The level of energy and interest you clearly have for the trails and for everyone on your committee. I had the pleasure of meeting a number of them at a recent volunteer event that was put on at the Senior Center. And one of your members showed me a YouTube video, and I don't know if you can explain that. I believe that's up on your site as well, is that
It will be
correct?
on
It
our
will
site,
be?
so it's in draft form, and
Okay.
I was gonna play it tonight, but it was difficult
It is
because
outstanding.
Yes, so Luisa Vargas has a talent of marketing in her past life, and she's brought it to our Trails Committee. So she's created, with the help of Isabel and some of the other committee members, a video demonstrating the trails. So it's a wonderful asset. We're gonna use it, and it's right now in draft form. We're gonna develop it for other sections of the trail and have it on our website so folks can get an idea of what we have here. And we wanna do it in different seasons so that we can show that there's a lot of trails that are great for cross-country skiing and snowshoeing right in our backyard. You don't have to travel far. So thank you for bringing that up, Dan.
Yeah,
It's a wonderful
Madam Chair, if the
project.
opportunity exists, for the Trails Committee to come back when that's ready, I think it'd be a great thing. Every one of your slides is shown on TV and available to the public. You'd
Yeah.
be surprised how many do watch, which
Yeah.
is great. And I think it'd be a wonderful opportunity to further promote the trails and all the great work you and the rest of the committee members do.
Thank you, and I appreciate that segue. We will be back, and we'll be asking for a little bit more, but we thought we would start by developing our relationship first, and I'll leave it at that.
So noted. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much, and we're all for collaboration, so that's wonderful. And I had also, as Selectman Kalenda said, it was a pleasure to meet all of you at the appreciation breakfast.
And thank you for the breakfast. I thought that was a wonderful demonstration of appreciation, and the committee was really, really happy to attend that. So thank you for organizing it and for doing that for all the volunteers.
It was great.
On behalf of the board, you're welcome. We greatly appreciate everything our volunteers do, so thank you. Excuse me. Next on the agenda, Betsy Rosenblum, Personnel Board Chair, update on personnel issues. Ms. Rosenblum, welcome.
I'm here to ask you to accept my resignation from personnel and sign me up for that.
No.
And what a positive vibe. And now I'm going to come and chill you down a little bit.
Welcome.
What? And Dorian's going to come with me.
You're not leaving me as chair.
Am I working? Working.
Yes,
I don't really need a microphone.
the viewing public needs it.
Are you ready for me? I have prepared a few remarks. Good evening. I'm Betsy Rosenblum. I'm the chair of the Personnel Board. With me is Dorian Jasinski, the clerk of the Personnel Board. We're joined by Barry Rubenstein, one of our new members. Mr. Purple told me your agenda is quite full and suggested I focus on what I want to accomplish. It's been a year since our boards had a joint meeting. I will summarize what the Personnel Board has been doing, the status of the SAP to date. I would also like to start a dialogue with your board about how we handle the personnel function in town. I'd like to share my observations after 15 months on the Personnel Board, 5 months as chair. This is not an easy conversation, but your time is tight, so I will endeavor to be direct. I have had numerous meetings and conversations with town officials, managers, employees, interested citizens, and my board. What has been lacking is a conversation with you, the Board of Selectmen. I appreciate the opportunity to start the conversation. My disclaimer: the facts as to what the Personnel Board has been doing and the votes we've taken are public record. The observations, opinions, and mistakes are mine and mine alone. My comments have not been vetted by my board. I joined the board in September 2017 in the wake of town meeting when many persons, including myself, realized there were some problems. I was told by some that Personnel Board had issues with absences, turnover, meeting regularly was a problem. I was told by some employees that they did not know when the board met and weren't able to get items on the agenda. The first message I wish to convey is that thanks to our moderator, Mr. Semino, and volunteers Jay Dietz, Mr. Rubenstein, Ms. Jasinski, we have surmounted these challenges. We're meeting regularly with a quorum. Personnel Board is open for business. Time does not permit me to discuss the individual resumes and talents of the board members. Suffice to say, it is a great group, and I'm honored to be the chair of the team. Also, plug, we have a vacancy on the board. If anyone's interested in public service, please contact the town moderator, P. Semino, at southboroughmass.com. Personnel experience is not required. I had no personnel experience, and look how far I've risen in 15 months. So we have instituted streamlined processes so that interested parties now know when we're meeting and how to get on our agenda. With help from our wonderful town clerk, Jim Hegarty, assistant clerk Michelle Jenkins, and Amy Townsley, we're publicly posting our packets. Using the Board of Selectmen as a model, we've put our employee performance evaluations on a consent agenda. Well, they're not ours, but the presentation to us is on a consent agenda. This has freed up time to tackle some bigger issues. Lastly, we undertook a long overdue review of the part-time salaries in Schedule C of the SAP, and we hope to have recommendations from that study included in this year's SAP. Apologies to you, Mr. Kalenda. You wanted to see progress on a merit program, and that has not happened. I'm happy to explore with you at another time, maybe April or May, when town meeting is behind us, why that didn't happen. I just didn't want you to think that we had forgotten it. It's definitely on our radar.
Thank you, ma'am.
So Personnel Board is now tackling some of the bigger issues, defining our practices, putting them in writing, figuring out how to improve our function, and what we should do with the SAP. Clarity is a top priority. In my conversations over the last 15 months, I have found that there is a great deal of confusion surrounding how the personnel function is handled in town, who does what, including what the Personnel Board does and how we do it. I've spent a large part of my time during the last 15 months just trying to sort out who does what and how they're supposed to do it. I offer these reasons for the lack of clarity. One, we do not have a town org chart that clearly defines lines of authority. I asked for the town org chart, was told we didn't have one, we didn't need one. It was not a priority. My board respectfully disagrees, especially on the eve of launching a campaign to change the town administrator to a stronger town manager, or whatever some folks hope to do. Let us state clearly now who does what now, before we start talking about making significant changes. Two, personnel has its own complications. We have 2 statutes and multiple parties involved. I recommend a separate personnel org chart. There are several players in this area: personnel board, town administrator / personnel director, assistant town administrator, board of selectmen, other boards and committees with employees, department heads and employees. Under the Personnel Bylaw, Chapter 31 of the Town Code, the Personnel Board has authority and responsibility to administer the SAP. Under the Town Administrator Statute, Chapter 27, Article 9, the Town Administrator, as Personnel Director, is empowered to administer the SAP, quote, under the guidance and oversight of the Personnel Board, end quote. Under the guidance and oversight of the Personnel Board. Thus, the TA bylaw says that Personnel Board has oversight authority of the town administrator in his capacity as Personnel Director. In my experience in the last 15 months, tells me that we have no actual or operational or practical oversight of the Personnel Director. The Personnel Director is hired, managed, and supervised exclusively by you, the Board of Selectmen. And we don't talk, our 2 boards, about how any of this is supposed to work in practice. Similarly, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, we still need to have a frank discussion about the role of the Assistant Town Administrator. I will not recap what happened at Town Meeting 2017. I think you were all there. The ATA currently wears 2 or 3 hats, depending on how you count them: Assistant Town Administrator, Staff Liaison to the Personnel Board, and frequently the delegatee of the Personnel Director. The current ATA provides valuable administrative support to the Personnel Board. We are all grateful for her assistance. By her own estimate, she spends somewhere between 60 to 75% of her time on Personnel Board. Yet, she doesn't answer to the Personnel Board. She reports to the Town Administrator. This poses some interesting issues when there are conflicts. Why does this matter? In my discussions, In my discussions with managers and boards, I hear the same themes over and over: predictability and uniformity. Everyone wants to know how the personnel process works, what the rules are, and that the rules are applied fairly and uniformly to all. As the Personnel Board seeks to provide clarity, we have repeatedly encountered challenges of one sort or another. In my 15 months, we have encountered situations in which other players in the process interpret statutes differently, sometimes rely on unwritten customs or interpretations not known to us or not widely available and known to others, and in other cases has simply made decisions without consulting us when it's clear, at least to us, that we should have been consulted. I am not trying to blame people for stepping in and trying to do the job as they see fit. I'm saying that we need to clarify roles, responsibilities, and expectations. We need to replace reliance on unwritten interpretations with clear, uniform guidance. A policy that everyone doesn't know about is by definition not transparent or predictable. When it is applied to some and not others, it is by definition not uniform or fair. If it involves the SAP, please, I say it to this board and to the other players, please pick up the phone. If it involves the SAP, talk to us before you pick up the phone and talk to someone else. In the 5 months I have been the chair of the Personnel Board, I have met frequently with Mr. Purple and Ms. Hale and expressed these concerns. I met with Mr. Purple and Ms. Hale a few hours ago to discuss the agenda for our next meeting. Meetings are cordial, as they should be, often productive, but we do have disagreements as to who owns what. Today, Mr. Purple handed me a memo about the EDC. He knew I would mention it. We both agreed that it is Exhibit A to the argument I am making here tonight. The EDC position is a microcosm of many of the issues I am speaking about. In a nutshell, I told him I believe that what is proposed must be approved by Personnel Board and referred to town meeting. He told me that under something called IMA, it's the BOS's call. I'm sure it will make for an interesting and lively debate at our next Personnel Board meeting, and possibly a call to the town attorney. When we don't agree, what recourse does the Personnel Board have when it feels that actions are being taken without proper predicate? Whose interpretation of statutes should guide when there is a conflict? Whose direction is the Assistant Town Administrator supposed to follow in the event of a conflict between the Personnel Board and the Personnel Director? I could go on and on. I think you get the picture. A final observation. This may sound harsh. I come from a legal background where you have to take care. Many of you come from backgrounds where you have to take care. We lack a good record-keeping system, a system for sharing information between parties, and in some corners of Town Hall, a lack of adherence to open meeting law. I'm not trying to impugn anybody's motives. I'm saying that things aren't getting shared, that in a better system would be shared. Information is not being kept and recorded in accordance with what I at least would consider best practices. Lastly, agendas and minutes have not always uniformly complied with the law. I think we can do better. So while I'm doing so much criticizing, I want to offer some praise to Brian Ballantyne, our finance director, Heidi Krieger, our town accountant, and Kristen Pasicane in payroll. For too long, I think the Personnel Board just looked at salaries and not the total cost of things or budgetary impacts. These members of the team are helping the board to bridge that chasm, to help us understand the numbers and budgetary impacts behind our actions. We have many wonderful employees, caring leaders, generous taxpayers. We do many things well. In the area of personnel, I think we can do better. Lastly, the SAP. You will recall that I was before you last year, a year ago. The conversation was largely centered on town meeting and the SAP. The takeaway was that you wanted the board to be transparent with town meeting, and we were. That was our goal as well. It's what we did. The SAP was passed unanimously. That was the easy part. Now that we have an SAP, the task is to do better and to improve it. As of this date, the Personnel Board has approved some very minor revisions to the SAP. We have just begun to discuss more substantive changes. I anticipate we will be having those discussions in January. We may have to have 2 meetings in January, and we can report back to you in early February with our recommendations. One of the most far-reaching changes that has been proposed is to recommend to town meeting that it remove from the bylaw its authority to approve the addition of new positions to the SAP and the reclassification of existing positions. In other words, that we would recommend that town meeting approval would no longer be required to add a new position to the SAP or to regrade an existing position. This has been advocated by the Personnel Director and at least one of the town's attorneys. We're told that Southborough is different than other towns in its allocation of personnel authority to its town meeting. The board, honestly, has struggled with the requirement of obtaining town meeting approval, especially in the case of reclassifications. This position makes sense. We receive many requests to reclassify employees to a higher grade with a salary bump. Last page. When the employee is doing the bigger job, it is hard to tell them that they have to wait until spring town meeting to get their upgrade, and especially that they have to wait until the next July 1st to get their raise. However, this change would represent a significant change in how the bylaw operates. It would remove a significant authority from our town meeting, our legislature. I approach such changes with extreme caution. I personally tend to favor more democracy than less, but I'm not a town manager. I tend to favor letting the taxpayers decide if a position should be added to the SAP or regraded. Again, that is just my opinion, and others believe differently. It will, again, make for interesting debate in the coming months. Thank you for your time. With your indulgence, I would ask if any other members of my board have any comments. Everybody sucked all the air out of the room. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for your comments. I don't think anything you've expressed tonight, I don't see any of that as a great challenge in any way to overcome. I think it's in my opinion, it's based on communication, and we can all do better on communication. Not just this board, but I think the community and all of our boards and committees as a whole. So I don't think there's anything insurmountable here that you've described. I think clarity on some roles. I think if an organization chart is something that the personnel board would require, I would certainly imagine Mr. Purple would be more than happy to supply information that's needed. I do believe in working as a team, and I think that's the important takeaway that I'm taking from this, is we all need to work better as a team. That's not criticism of anyone, any board, committee, board member, anyone that serves the town. At the end of the day, we're all volunteers, and we're all trying to do the best that we can do. And my role, being on the board, is to all of us to work towards better communication for everyone. And it's great that you came here. Whether or not we may have a difference of opinion or we may not. I mean, at the end of the day, we're communicating, and to me, this is a good first step. So I will open it up to the board as well.
I don't want this to continue, so I think Betsy brought up some concerns that I think need to be addressed now. There is an organizational chart available. It was done when Ms. Kitchen was here. I received it from her anyway, so that could be done in 2 days. Labor Council, I think, needs to really be the individual to address the questions as far as who does what and who has oversight. That can't linger before we get to town meeting. We need to know that now. I'm suggesting we have Labor Council answer the real detailed questions that need to be answered as far as authority and roles before town meeting. So if you could set that up, that would be helpful.
We have had a few legal opinions, but they haven't, to my mind at least, resolved these issues. Some of the issues were seen as such a scramble that, I don't want to use the word punted. Ooh, I just did. They just said we should develop better policies and procedures.
Did Labor Council come to your meeting?
We've hosted him twice.
I'm going to be a little sarcastic. Is it attorney looking at attorney decision-making?
He was called in before I was on the board.
Right.
He actually showed up at my first meeting, I believe it was September 13th of 2017, to opine about the SAP and some conflicts there. And subsequently, he was invited back, not by the board, but I believe Mr. Purple or Ms. Hale, on behalf of the board, to opine on open meeting law changes and a change in the law that had come down. So he hasn't directly he hasn't read my brief and addressed all of those issues. So if you feel that would be helpful.
I think it would be helpful just to get it on the table and have Labor Council address your issues that you brought to our attention this evening.
There was actually one
clarity.
phone call, I'm sorry, I didn't mean
That's
to
all right.
interrupt. There was a phone call. I was told at a personnel meeting that Mr. Purple and Ms. Hale, if I remember correctly, were going to be speaking to him on some other matters, and I asked if I could sit in. Rather than have them talk to him and then come back to me, and me as an attorney do what my husband knows so well I do, so he just sets me up with people to talk to in the first place rather than badger him.
Right.
So I sat in on the call, and we did talk directly about lines of authority, and I think, Mark, you could correct me, Vanessa, he basically said, Mark does the day-to-day stuff and we do the big picture, something like that. But it wasn't, yeah. You always try to harmonize two statutes that are in conflict. That's a basic
We're
principle.
talking Labor Council.
Yeah, that was Tim as well.
Yes.
I don't think that I haven't personally spoken to Aldo about any of these issues.
No, Aldo usually will defer to Tim on any labor issues. So he sticks with the general counsel stuff, and Tim handles the labor pieces.
I suggest you sit down and have a discussion again.
Should come to a meeting.
Thank you.
Any other comments or discussion? No.
I think that's a great idea, Ms. Faniff. I was thinking the same thing when, and you offered, I think, that would be, you know, a good idea to have Labor Council sit down and maybe even have it part of a regular cadence. I mean, he can't be everywhere all the time, you know, his time is money as well, and, we need to be cognizant of the taxpayers' spend, and so, but I think it's helpful, to at least have an initial meeting and hopefully clarify roles and responsibilities. There's often, you're gonna see, as you know, yeah, two lawyers can have differing opinions on anything, including state statute, so, but I think that's important, and maybe a, you know, regular cadence of his participation once in a while would be helpful. Do you think it could part of the challenge be that town government goes 1,000 miles a minute, and town government is run by mostly many volunteers who aren't here every single day? Is that part of the, I'm assuming that's part of the challenge.
So part of the bigger question is how much, you know, in short, in my mind, maybe not in everybody else's, how much democracy do you want to take away?
That's right. So, what does that democracy look like when you've got town government that is, as I said, and we know, you're sitting in the chair, you're a volunteer. You probably don't get paid a whole lot for the position. I'm guessing upwards of around zero. Okay. And so.
I have a cot in Vanessa's office.
So I think, at least it's my guess, and maybe that's, you're seeing it since you've been in the role. Things happen so fast in town, things need to move forward, and we're volunteers. Some of us here every other Tuesday, some of us here once a month, you know, so it's, I think that's part of the challenge, but I think having Labor Council identify what bylaw requires, and then if there's a mode of practice as to how it's been operating, if that is lawful, and that helps the town move forward, great. You know, as long as that's the opinion, and it's, you know, but your role and responsibility is in statute and has to be understood by everyone and respected. And if you have, and your board has decision-making authority on things, and that is what the bylaw says, then that's what we do.
I'm all for talking to anybody who can help us solve the problem. But when I look at the SAP, which I do an awful lot, and I look at the town administrator bylaw, that I do an awful lot, I want to know what your board, as the CEOs of the town, how do you feel about the line that says we have oversight over the personnel director? What does that mean to you, and how would you like that handled?
And I think that's a great, oversight is a fair, it can be a subjective term. Lawyers can have a great time just talking about what oversight means. I'd love to have Labor Council weigh in on that and give us that opinion, and let's have that discussion.
Guess I kind of look at it a different way. I've been thinking about it for a long time. I'm a lawyer, and I have looked at it. How to say this diplomatically. I'm not known for being diplomatically. I don't know how much it would help me personally to have a lawyer read it, because I have quite a...
Extensive background.
I was a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and read a lot of statutes
Well,
and did an admin practice, so I think I can tell you where the problem lies, is that the
Might you
people
get
that run the town need to dialogue and figure out what they want it to mean to us.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Because you have Supreme Court decisions that are rarely are they 9-0 decisions,
We
right? So-
might save a lot of money if you just sat down with me. I don't want to embarrass Barry. Barry is a retired labor counsel, and he volunteered for the personnel board precisely because he has a certain skill set, as do I. So if we could maybe talk about scheduling another meeting with your board, where you could sit down with the legal talent we already have and maybe narrow the issues.
Well, you know,
I don't normally think, you know, I had a toothache last week, I went to the dentist. That's what I think. This is a toothache of a different kind. You don't necessarily, sorry, that was a bad analogy. We have plenty of lawyers. I don't really think that's the issue. I think it's deciding, just having a little bit of a dialogue between the two boards. You guys are the CEOs of the town. This is how I see it.
I just think you need someone who is expert in that area. I'm a lawyer, I'm not an expert in labor law at all. So
But we wrote the
I come
bylaw.
back to Ms. Faniff's suggestion, which I think is an outstanding one. I think that's a great start, and let's have that as part of an ongoing discussion with you guys and an ongoing discussion, and I'd love to see what that opinion is on everything that you've identified in your report tonight, which I thought was an excellent report.
I'm suggesting that, Betsy, because you're gonna be rewriting the SAP plan to be approved at town meeting. I think that would be the first step, to meet with Labor Council to understand how he interprets what you're doing, so that we can understand what you're doing. At least a different, there may be the same opinion. I understand you're an attorney, I'm not an attorney.
Two different things. The things that I've identified aren't necessarily things that we're going to change in the SAP. It's that we have the two
It's the
statutes.
administrative part that you're looking
Yeah,
at.
we wrote that statute. Town, I don't know if town did,
No.
I wasn't on scene when the town administrator bylaw was written. That was
Before
That
your
was
time.
us writing it. That wasn't a town labor lawyer writing it. That was passed by town
I think
meeting.
it was reviewed
Okay.
by town labor council before it
Hey,
went to town
I'll
meeting.
do whatever you want. If the first step is to start with Tim Norris.
I'm suggesting it would be the first step.
I also agree. I think that's, for me,
That's what they
that's a
want, so
first
do.
step. I mean, I think what we wanted to accomplish tonight was an open dialogue, and I think we've started there. I
Thank you.
think we are cognizant of the issues you've brought forward, Betsy, and I think everyone on this board has clearly shown we're more than happy to work together to come to some solution that works for all of us. At the end of the day, whether we're all completely happy with it or not, but we can say we work together, and I think that's really important. So this is a start.
That's where the board wants to go. That's where we'll go.
So by January.
Thank you.
We'll have an update.
Sounds good.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Done? You have a hot seat?
Next on the agenda, excuse me, Brian Ballantyne, Finance Director, presentation of fiscal year 20 budget alternatives.
Madam Chair, do you want to recess at all? Do you need to recess before he begins? He's going to set up for a while anyway. Okay,
Oh, no, he's all set.
okay.
Good evening, Mr. Ballantyne. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think I'll get those lights real quick. Or someone will. So I'm going to run through this at a pretty, I don't want to say quick pace, but not going to hold up for too many pieces of this. We started this discussion a few months ago, I think the initial discussion, but the last discussion the board had with, well, it was myself, I think the town administrator was incapacitated that evening, but the discussion that we had was a directive for us to go back and put together a budget that was based on a tax rate increase of three options, a 7%, a 6%, and a 5%. The initial requests, the initial original requests from the departments were just under a 10% tax increase for FY20. I think the board recognized, as well as the rest of us, that that probably was not a viable option. So we had that directive passed on to us, which we certainly took under our wing. I just want to go quickly through the process to date. Even though most of you are familiar with this, it started in July. It's hard to believe, with the calendar issued, and we sort of weaved our way through September and October with the initial request to the departments and some meetings with the departments, as well as the advisory committee setting up their schedule and working in tandem with that board. And we came to November, where a lot of the work we did to compile the first version took place, and where our options and guidance was given to the town administrator and myself. So we come to this month, December, the holiday month, and here we are to finalize, hopefully finalize tonight, our final directives to sort of start narrowing this process down. And advisory is currently has been meeting with departments based on their original department requests and sort of learning a little bit about some of the bigger departments to get them going, since the budget schedule has moved up a little this year. So the original budget submission, again, was just under 10%. Education was about 3.4. Town was about 5.6, including debt. New items were very limited this year. There were a few departments that wanted some small things, a few departments that wanted a little bit of service changes. So we can see these consisted of the Youth and Family, the Library, Open Space Committee, Planning, and Conservation. Oddly enough, this year, we had a number of requests from, this is the first time this has happened for new budgets for boards. It couldn't come in a worse year. The Municipal Tech Committee, the Trails Committee, who you just heard from, who does great work, the Arts Committee. So it was a really odd year. We don't usually get that, and we had a number of those requests. Unfortunately, again, they came at a horrible year. That's very difficult to begin something like that. So the post-original budget submissions, Board of Selectmen met in November. I think that's what we remember. The final vote was, again, these three options, 7, 6, and 5. Department head meeting was held on November 28th, last week, which we discussed all these reductions and the bottom line numbers as far as these scenarios. Important to note, these scenarios are draft form. They're templates. They're not where we're going to be at the end, most of them. Maybe some of them, I can't say. But I don't really want to get into discussion tonight of, where Department X should be versus where they are now. We're really not at that level yet. One reason it would be pointless for that is because Mark and the town administrator and myself haven't gone to that step and sat down with these departments and gone through the numbers as far as, okay, let's look at your budget, let's look at what we think, and let's look what any kind of feedback we have and see if, this makes sense, doesn't make sense, if we disagree, if we agree, those type of discussions. So this really isn't the point where we're ready to have those detailed discussions. But we do want to take a look real quick at those three options and see what they mean in a global sense, so you can get a sense to give a little more direction. So the initial 7% tax, to get down to the 7%, we had to reduce a little over $1 million. The operating budgets were $326,000 that we reduced, and the capital and budget articles were $693,000. So if you take a look at that percent over the right, I think that's interesting, because in the three options it's going to change. You can see in that first option, we'd prefer to retain hours and services than, capital is sort of the place that there are some big dollar items, number one, but number two, we think the mission is more important because most of our services are done by people and labor. I mean, that's 80% or maybe more of the funding that we supply for our towns and schools. So we feel that's really important to maintain that. So that's why the 68% is on these capital items that have been recommended to be either deferred or reduced. On the next 6%, the next two, in fact, the 6 and 5, we each have to find another about a $400,000 reduction. It gets much harder. We're now at $560,000, in operating budgets. You can see the salaries, and this is the first version. We actually have to have a discussion with the school department and see if that $116,000 can somehow be accommodated. Most of the departments, actually in version 1 of 7%, most of the departments have very little growth in their non-salary budgets. That's not really what growth usually is anyways, but in this version, it's pretty much gone. There's, in other words, the dollars that they got for this year are the dollars that they're getting in exact terms for the proposal for next year, or less. The advisory reserve fund, we reduce $60,000, and again, we reduce some of the capital and budget articles, a few more $100,000 in the 6% version. and I can return to these for a little more discussion on each one. The 5% tax rate reduction, total reduction of $2 million. Unfortunately, in this one, there's no way around losing people in the town or reducing some services. There's just, it's not gonna happen. The operating budgets are down almost $1 million, and if you'll see that percentage on the right that I was mentioning in the first version, it's now at 51% and 49%, so it's swung because we can't cut any more capital. There's really, in this version, there's almost no capital left to cut. So that's not a good place to be. We have some key points there about some things that we could eliminate with positions, and town hall closing, I want to comment on that because I put that in there because it was an option that we actually talked about that a few times, and Selectman Faniff probably remembers these conversations with Ms. Kitchen and Ms. Conlon even, I believe, back then. So that's why I have it in there. I want to say it's probably not the option we'd go with. It just generated a long conversation. I'm going to put that to rest, that we could do that. It's an option, but I don't think that might be the best way of finding that money. So again, just a draft option for you to look at. But these type of things would have to be considered nonetheless. So you're looking at a lot of part-time hours going away. We'd have to actually add back some money to some unpleasant areas like unemployment, and we actually add back a little to the reserve fund in a option like this to anticipate departments in that scenario may have money that they need to use unexpectedly for for items that they can't pass on to the next year, which could very well happen. So why is the tax rate elevated? We talked a little bit about this the last meeting, but it's a good thing just to circle back to for a minute. So I went through and reset the tax or the budget back to the beginning of the year and just set it back to a level dollar. Everything's the same. And then we started adding back in the things to see where the percentage would start going up. It's a little difficult to follow this slide. I probably would have put it in a different format if I had time, but so that if you add in one thing at a time, it just brings it up each little step here. So if you add in and again, I don't know how much you remember this, but the SBAB grant is a grant we've been getting for a number of years from the state, which has been great. It's been over $2 million. It's decreasing quite a bit. It's a little over $1 million this year that we're losing. Just happens to be the year FY20 that it goes down. So that's a revenue to the town. It just comes in and even though it's supposed to offset debt and it's really just a revenue against the tax rate. So losing that, just already you're at 2.7%. The grant goes away in FY24. And thankfully, it's bad to lose it, but thankfully in that year, the main school loan, the large one for the tri-school, also goes away. It just happens to be the same year. So the school and the grant, the school debt payment and the grant both go sort of away, and it's almost a wash. So that's sort of a silver lining, if there is any silver lining. This year, that didn't quite happen, though. So if you add in the capital and budget, then the tax rate increases to 4.58%. The insurance is, as you can see in the OPEB, jumps to 5.73%. Not a huge jump with that one, but the remaining 3.82% is the departmental budgets, which then brings it up to that 9.55, which is the original budget that we saw. So I put it in a little bit of a chart here to see what drove this tax rate if you just did, how it was weighted. So you can see that the two big things obviously are the budgets and the debt and the loss of that SBAB grant. So you're at 60, just about 70% with those two items. Public safety debt is always a question we receive from folks on, how does that factor into this? So that's about 2.75% of this tax rate increase. It is an estimate again. I can't be certain of that because in the spring, we've borrowed one roughly in thirds. We've borrowed 1/3 permanently, which we're paying now. We borrowed 1/3 that's a temporary loan that we're gonna convert, we think, to a permanent loan in the spring, which will then have a FY '20 impact. And then that third piece is sort of the wild card. Depends how the construction's going. It seems to be moving along pretty well. And it depends how their cash flow needs sort of fall. So that's a little bit of a gray area right now. The Choate Field design debt was $200,000. Put this as draft, and I guess I can mention it now. I was going to mention it later. However, there are several items in this. This is a snapshot of where we were at last week. And unfortunately, I have 3 or 4 other items that have changed already. And I wasn't going to change it for this meeting because we'd be chasing it every day and it gets confusing. So Choate Field is now, it is Choate Field, but the 200,000 seems to be 120,000, which is one of my changes I have to make to the budget, which is going to help us by about $40,000 next year. That's the good news. But and since we're on that topic, there's a couple of other items. The facilities capital with the library renovations actually a little higher, a couple of $100,000 higher than are in the budget. So that washes away this $40,000. There's a couple of small budgets that have changed since for a few $1,000s since last week too. So that takes care of that issue. So just so you know, this overall, unfortunately, it's a little worse than is shown here. The school debt decreased $840,000. Town increased $1 million. Again, a lot of that's public safety debt. Some of it's recreation and DPW tank debt and other things. Part of the problem, again, I told the board, I think this last time we met, there's really no new revenues too much except for our annual 2.5 increase. So that's thank God free cash, which is a revenue source that fluctuates year to year, was in our favor this year. That is another bright spot if we can point those out. So the goals tonight is to really look at those 3 options, get a feel for what they entail, and hopefully give the town administrator and myself a final direction to start going in. And what we can do is we can meet with we can first put all our new numbers in, and then we can meet with the departments and start, because that is a process we have to go through, meet with the departments and recommend, have further recommendations where you can see detail. And I think the next meeting will be the meeting where you can look at and see all the detail associated with each department and the changes we think might be appropriate, and see if you agree or not. These are just some suggestions too to help the next few years, because I don't know how great the next two or 3 years will be. All debt authorizations, again, I'm sorry to pick on Mr. Selectman Fan. You've seen all this before, and you're aware that we used to do all our capital bonding with exemptions. In fact, when I got here, I think they were all exempt, which was unusual for me. But it's actually good policy, because I know I've said this before, but when you approve these projects through town meeting only, and you don't go to the ballot, they go under the cap, which means if they go under the cap, then now you have a fixed expense under the cap that you're funding in competition with all your operational departments, insurances, everything that we normally do under the tax rate recap, the tax cap. And obviously, once we hit that cap, again, there's no choice. We have to cut something to meet that state law. So I would just recommend the board to at least consider that going forward. They institute that's a pretty simple policy they could shoot for, and just be cognizant as we go through all of these budgets. We'll say it again. Looked good coming in. I mean, there's nothing that we can sit and say, oh, this is, why did this person submit this, or this is just money that they want. I mean, this was really some valid issues that we talked about with the department heads so far this year for their budgets next year. The problem is you can't you know, if the board, and I think the board should look at the departments and see if, since you are the policymakers, not the town administrator myself, and if there's something that you do want to add back, you see a department that, for whatever reason, is a higher importance or is vital, you think, this year, or any of that, I think you should advocate for that and support it. Just be aware that when you do that, now we probably should find it on the other end. Where are we going to take it from? So otherwise, we get into a problem real quick, just adding things back. I don't think we want to do that. And again, I'll say that some of these requests that we got, quite a few of them, in the scheme of things, not a lot of money. We had quite a few people tell us it's only $1,000, it's only 500, it's only 2, it's only 5, it's only, et cetera. Well, again, if you add them all up, they start to add up this year, and it's important to kind of have some consistency. So that's what we're shooting for. It's not a fun exercise. I don't think either one of us have enjoyed it, but I think that's what we need to do. So you'll see even in the 7%, most departments have changed or have reductions in them. Not too many were held harmless. If they were, there was probably a reason for it. But even symbolically, a few smaller departments were, shared a little bit of pain. So, so no one skated off this one, unfortunately. So the areas of uncertainty that I think I mentioned, I didn't mention the benefits budget, but yes, insurance renewal rates will be coming in probably January, might be later. I can't say for sure. We think we know sort of the range that we're going to be in. It's not going to be a great savior this year, I don't think. Some years it's come in significantly lower, and it's a large amount of money, so it can really help, but I don't think this year will be that way. The retirement assessment from Worcester County Regional is also set in January, so we won't have too long to wait, but again, I can't say that may not actually go higher. I think I said it pretty conservative, but I kind of know what the Worcester Regional County was going through last year, and if it's the same thing, it's probably not going to be lower. The capital requests, we do have a new number for the library fixes and the mitigation, but we'll put those in our numbers for January and see how those fall out. I think there's still some work to be done on those too. The regional and K-8 schools, this is an interesting one, I guess. We had the opportunity of the town administrator and myself of going over to the schools and being their guests, as well as the Northborough town administrator and a few other people, to go through the minimum contribution rate calculations and all the associated things that go into it. And I don't even know what to really say about it. I don't know if the town administrator could even describe it.
I dare you to try to explain it. We learned enough to be dangerous, and where we thought that enrollment drove the number. Enrollment is one of the last things that you actually look at that drives the number. It's community wealth and other factors that really drive the number. So
it's very convoluted too. It's you go from one step to another. It's all set by the state, obviously, and there's been some talk about redoing it. I really think they should redo it just so you can understand it. But maybe Selectman Kalenda is familiar with it also. But it's an interesting exercise. I raised that only because at the regional, what we thought me and Mark were doing dances to was that because of the enrollment, we were going to have this great year. We're finding out it may not be great, and I have my fingers crossed. But the odds are even that we may actually have to raise that budget from where it is for the regional. So depending on where they go with their percentages, where they vote their budget, and where they, when they run their numbers. So the superintendent is still running those numbers through. It's hard to do this early in the year too. I commend her for giving it a best effort, but we're in contact with her, and again, hopefully by our next meeting, we'll have a more concise estimate of that regional number. So that's a little bit, I felt I had to mention that. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, you've seen the material and the budgets and the capital that kind of goes away with each option. So I think, we're really just asking for what's the next step for the board? How do you want us to approach this? And do you have any, guidance for us to, hone in on a more, maybe a single budget, and we'll see where we go from there.
Thank you, Brian. I have a few questions for you.
Mhm.
So, in looking at the 5, 6, and 7, and where potentially the cuts would be made for the 5, 6, and 7, one of the things that was somewhat startling to me is I actually had went and did a analysis of salary versus other amounts. And when you're talking about cutting, the salary makes up and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, salaries make up the majority of the budgets. In most cases, well over 80% of a department's budget is salary. So if you're looking, for instance, at cutting $2,300 or $2,500 out of a budget that has $12,000 outside of salary, my concern is always for service to the taxpayers. I just wanted to make that point. I have a question for you, and I don't know that you necessarily know the answer to this. At the 5, 6, and 7, what would the average increase to the average? I know we use the median home price in Southborough for those averages, but do you have any idea what the average tax increase at 5, 6, and 7 would be? You may not have it tonight. If you do, that'd be great, but I'd just be curious what those numbers may be.
It should be somewhere between 450, be anywhere from 500 to 700 per average house.
Okay. And I'm not
'Cause
going
it's
to...
almost 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7.
Right. And I'm not going to hold you to that.
It's rough, but that's.
Put you on the spot. That's fine.
Yeah.
If we could just take a look at your other FY20 budget factor slide for a second.
This one.
That one.
Right?
So I just want to talk about the permanent debt of the 0.94%. I had spoken to you and also Mr. Purple about some questions I had on that.
Mhm.
And I understand that's based on capital items in the past from town meeting. But I just wanted to bring up, I had asked you for a breakout of the 396.
Mhm.
And just so the public's aware on this, $144,000 of this is actually for 9/11 Field.
Mhm.
And there is a payback schedule on that. And can you just touch briefly on that, Brian, on what the schedule is and why it's not being done over the 15-year period versus...
Right, so it was a $600,000 loan, I think we did a couple of years ago, or authorized a couple of years ago, several years ago. So we actually went out and saved roughly $133,000 in interest by doing it over 5 years. Now, that's great, except each year is a little higher in payments. So I kind of look back on the some spring work we did as far as paying back. It's just estimates because the 911 field generates fees. Obviously, we don't always know what the exact fees are going to be, and it's just coming back online, et cetera, et cetera. But it looks like we could pay it back with an annual payment of about $58,000 to FY31. So in other words, the 911 would pay back the town over a number of years. Now, that's not in this budget either. That's another thing. Because I just did that today when I was speaking with you. So we may have some money anywhere. There's $30,000 sitting in the fund right now. I just need to see what the intent is with that money through the end of the year, and then we can allocate some offset money through the town meeting coming up. So in other words, it's going to you're right. It's going to offset some of that amount. It's not going to offset all of it. Maybe, I mean, if the years are good, we could probably offset half of it. and just, go through a few more years. The bond will be paid, and then they'll still pay back the town
Right.
over a number of years.
Okay, but
So
I think the point I was trying to make was that in this 396, a third of it is actually, a third of it this year, I should say.
Correct, a third of it
The
this
full
year.
amount of the
Yeah.
600,000 is going to be paid back to the taxpayers.
Correct,
It was just more cost-effective to
correct.
do it this way versus what would the average bond, 15 years, would it have been on 600,000?
Could have been, it depends, some communities, it could have been 10, 15. It may have been 15 only because of the lease, was just to line it with that, but,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
that is probably good to have. The problem with going to 15 is once you have a bond, it locks you into certain things, and until it's paid off, you can't do certain things, so in a sense, there's a benefit to that too.
Okay, thank you. And just the breakout of just some of the other numbers for the public's awareness is that 60,000 of that number also was what was approved at town meeting for the golf course, for the clubhouse. And so that's roughly 51% between those two. And then the balance was DePetrie Field, Trotter Track, and Lundblad Design, which is that's a 1 year, $75,000.
Correct, it's so small, right.
So
right.
that is a 1 year that won't be reflective going forward into next year. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for me. I know we've talked a lot about in the past about the trend that the next 3 years could be very interesting for the town. And can you just touch briefly on, you may have already done it through your presentation, and I apologize if you did, Brian.
That's okay.
I'm sick and I'm in a little bit of a fog here tonight, so,
So yes, I can. So the next 3 years, and by the way, we are going to put this into a more formal format eventually. I haven't done it yet because we haven't been ready to do it yet as far as a projection for like a 3, 5. We're actually going to do a 10-year. I'm more interested in the 3 to 5 year. But we want to have a good baseline, and there's just been so much going back and forth. At this time, it's still what normally would be very early in the budget. So I just kind of want to make sure that baseline is kind of consistent so we don't have to drive ourselves nuts. So that will be forthcoming. But in general, the next, 3 years, I don't see a whole lot of extra revenue coming. There's really no projects in the town other than, the municipal ones, but there's not a lot of commercial projects or anything like that. Or right now, the environment, with our motor vehicle excise is pretty flat. I don't see the state coming out with some big thing for us. There's little things we can do, and we'll try to do that. But if you look at the capital and the capital plan, again, for the next few years, again, we do another smaller jump in FY21 of a couple, $400,000, and then it sort of comes down. But then in 23, there's another big jump. So we got, just in capital, we got some sort of smoothing out maybe we want to look at as it is right now. So that's going to be another pressure on the budget. I think it's going to be sort of similar scenarios as this year. It's going to kind of look similar. It's going to be capital and debt. Again, that is tough. And the department heads, I was trying to explain this, haven't seen this sort of, it's sort of cyclical. The state, I won't say the federal government because they're their own, but the state and the municipalities are sort of cyclical with budgets. Eventually they go through these periods where, revenue is very, very tight. And for a certain amount of years, you have to be very careful about new services, or in fact, we all know there are some years we hope just not to have any reductions in service. So I think we're in one of those cycles. We're in a sort of a spot now where the next 2 to 4 years, especially with the public safety building and some of the projects, needed or not needed, some of the projects that are going to be considered by the town, are gonna really put a pressure on the operating departments, like this year. So they're gonna have to really get used to, you know, I hear constantly, the residents want, the residents want, the residents want. If you go in a vacuum and go down to any department, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they want, you know, service A expanded to 3 other services. You can't, because if you do that, you know, we're just expanding our services again, and we're not fixing the problem. I mean, I hate to say it, there are just some years you have to maintain what you have, and we have good services. So let's work to keep them and not have them be in a situation where we have to, you know, unfortunately say we do have to cut a department, you know, their labor, and they have to reduce their services from offering 10 items to, you know, 3. We don't want to be in that situation. So it was a long answer to your question, but I think the short answer is that it's going to be like this. It's going to be very similar for the next, you know, like I said, 2 to 4 years maybe. That's the easiest way to answer it.
Fair enough, thank you. I will tell you, in looking at the 5, 6, and 7 for me, it was concerning that we're looking at cutting hours, services, and potentially staff. I think that there's a lot to look at and a lot to consider here. I think we need to be respectful of the taxpayers as well, to, you know, looking at a 7% tax increase is going to be tough for some. Unfortunately, some of the reasons we're here today are based on some past decisions that town meeting has made. And again, I'm not knocking any decisions town meeting has made at all. But we're at a point now that we have to look at what we've done and how we're going to fund it and how we're going to pay it. In looking at trying to figure out how we could potentially cut back things, I know I had asked the question, just for the board's information, of Mr. Purple and Mr. Ballantyne regarding the salary item, because salary does make up such a large percentage of our budgets. And I asked the number, if the question, if salary is not used, is that given back to the town? And that is not necessarily the case. There is no policy for that. I would like the board at a future meeting to have dialogue on, if it's a salary item, it should be designated to just salary. It shouldn't be a what's left at the end of the year, let's spend it so our budgets don't get affected. I think that's, in my opinion, not necessarily effective to the taxpayer. I had spoken briefly to Mr. Ballantyne, if there's a way to do it that at the end of the year, in some cases, why there may be an overage in the salary is somebody may leave, it's already in the budget for that amount, at the end of the year, it's there. My opinion is, and again, it's just my opinion, that those funds should go back into the budget to help offset some of these costs. So I would ask the board to consider that at a future, or at least have a discussion on that at a future meeting, whether that's a fiscally responsible policy to consider, whether we're talking $5,000 or $15,000. At the end of the day, every taxpayer gets impacted by that. So that being said, thank you, Brian. I know you and Mark have been really good about answering my 50,000 questions that I have and helping me understand some things that I didn't. I will open it up to the board. Thank you. Mrs. Faniff.
I don't know how else to say this other than I'm somewhat disappointed. The fact that we're still basically where we were when we started the discussion. The department heads have the 7% budget, I have to assume. I watched the advisory board meeting last week. Have they come back with comment to you?
Yes, we've had some, and I'm not sure if Mark has had more conversations. I've had a few conversations informally but we have not had a process yet to bring departments in to talk to us formally. There's been some feedback, though, I will say that.
So they weren't on the phone the next morning saying,
Some were, a couple were.
well, I'm looking at the audience, and it kind of surprises me the department heads, with the exception of a couple, aren't here this evening, or the commissions, which makes the conversation even harder. There are new employees in this budget, as presented,
Yes.
and I would have to assume that the department department heads have had discussions about the need. All right, and then, I'm looking at the fire department, as looking for a new title within that department, and I can understand the rationale. I come from a fire department background. However, we have a department head that's retiring. The last thing I want to see is a structure of a department in place before we're able to evaluate a new employee in that department. There should be no new position, no new title, SAP or otherwise. So right there's $60,000.
That position, Mrs. Faniff, is not reflected in any of those options.
In the options I have, it is, starting in January.
In the original budgets
In the
that you
originals,
have,
yes.
that's correct.
That's what
That's
Mrs.
all
Faniff
we
is-
have.
yes. Yeah.
That's all I have,
So,
is what I had Brian printed for me
The
yesterday.
original budgets, yeah.
They're in my budgets.
correct.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know what we're working from if that budget has changed.
So I think and I appreciate the job that Brian did this
I'm
evening.
not
Yeah.
saying-
No, I know.
I'm just
So
surprised that there's not department heads in this room demonstrating to this board that they support the budget that was submitted for this discussion this evening.
So just to clarify, and some of the things that Brian offered, so I think at this point, we have brought forward, here is a view of what a 5%
Right.
tax increase budget would look like, a 6% and a 7, to give you an idea of what that would mean in terms of either personnel, service level, capital, or a little bit of all three. Once the board kind of gives us a sense, understanding what makes up the percentage of those, how much of this is capital, how much of this is debt, understands what those pieces are, and we have some direction. As Brian said, we need to then go back to the departments and have the conversations as to, all right, here's where your new bottom line is. How do you get to that bottom line? What does that mean to you? What things can't you do? What things are you able to still do? Hours, how do you want to address that? Because at the end of the day, the departments understand more intimately and on a day-to-day basis where they can either absorb the cuts or where they're going to be able to handle the cuts with the least impact to the service level. And they know that better than Brian and I do. And so we can give you an idea of where we think those cuts may make sense. The departments are the ones who we're going to, go back and have conversations once we have a goal to work towards as to what those actual impacts in each individual budget would be. So I'm not terribly surprised that you don't have the room full of department heads and things like that, simply because they're waiting to see where you might be in terms of what you feel is an overall tax increase that you could be comfortable with. And then, as Brian said, a lot of the heavy lifting and the work is going to begin in the individual meetings with the departments to get to those targets.
All right, I'll speak for myself. I feel we're at a critical point right now where we cannot afford any new employees, any new titles, any positions that require health insurance. We need to look at shared positions to save positions or to fill those vacancies if we have half-time employees now moving into a full-time position where the town would get some resources back from that full-time employee that may have left. It's difficult without knowing what the school numbers are, which puts both you and the finance team at a disadvantage. So I appreciate that for someone that's been on the school committee. But
And I think, and just I do think it puts advisory at a little bit of a disadvantage too, because they'd like to wrap up their process sometime in the second week of January. But unfortunately, a lot of the information that Brian spoke about, isn't gonna come available until the governor releases his budget, probably the third week in January, as well as some of the regional retirement numbers and things of that nature. So those are the things that could shift this. And then the last couple of weeks of January, the first week of February, we're making some adjustments and having more discussions on the fly.
All right, another question, which I thought we needed an enterprise fund for the ambulance fund. There is no ambulance fund offsets on any of this budget this year, correct? From the copy I have.
There is, I just have to remember, there might be, Bonnie. Well, we have remember we have that 275,000, that's like a place, it's not even a placeholder, it's just a routine transfer every year from the ambulance fund. And I think there's another 130,000 for the fire had, maybe you didn't have, maybe they had it on a separate sheet. They did have 2 capital items for 130,000.
The defibrillators,
Yes, well, no, I'm sorry, it's,
out of the ambulance fund?
air compressors and police and fire radio systems.
They're all coming out of the ambulance.
Yes, those 2
Now, the
items.
reason I asked that question is, if the town collects $500,000 on ambulance services, and the fire department allocates $200,000 to miscellaneous items that they need for the ambulance services, the other $300,000 goes into the general fund, which offsets the entire town budget.
Well, all ambulance funds go into that receipts reserve fund,
But
so it's a special
It's
fund.
used as income on the overall budget.
It's used, there's an offset, and then there's, yes,
Right.
there's a piece that's an offset, and then there's other stuff that we usually try to, like fire truck and the purchase of an ambulance.
But if
Other
nothing
items
is-
that you're
But
familiar
if
with.
nothing is purchased,
Mhm.
that dollar value is, how is that identified in the overall budget?
Well, sort of, it's similar to what would it be similar to? It's not quite like a revolving fund. It's its own type of holding account, almost like an escrow account where you pay it out,
But it's
depending on what
used
town
as-
meeting decides.
But it offsets the total budget.
A piece of it, yes, traditionally, we use that 275,000
Right, so
offset the budget.
$275,000 out of X number of dollars
Correct,
every year,
correct.
or every other year, 200,
I think it's
250,
been every year.
275,
Yeah, it might have
whatever.
been 250 and then it went up to 275, yeah.
So we're talking about another sum of money that we are counting on that we might not have. If the fire department comes in and says, I need a new ladder truck, or I need X, because we're using it as general funds.
There's the town account.
It's just a cautionary thing. I think we
No,
really
I
need to be
agree, and I
very
don't,
cautious
I don't
about it.
disagree with you. The town accountant maintains a cash flow, and it actually finally has shown a year that's in red on that. Took a while, actually, but there is a year that's actually where there's a red dollar
No, I
instead of
asked
a
for the
white, a
accounting
blue
of it
dollar.
last week, and
Yep.
Heidi provided. I think we need to be aware that we're using some of that income to offset other things, and it's gonna get accumulative at some point, which we're already at, I think. I'm hoping the department heads will cut. $500 is a lot of money for a $500,000 house, if that's the number you're projecting.
Mr. Shea?
Thank you for going through this exercise. I mean, I think it, as we had asked, it helps define where we see the reductions in the amounts that each of the departments are looking to, or that they're gonna be requesting, that they originally requested. So if I get this correct, so a lot of it, like, and I'll take example, the 6% budget, which has an assumption that these are the recommended areas where the increases will be reduced by the amounts that we have shown and read and all the information provided to us. That assumes everybody's in agreement with that. And I know that there are some departments that are, very, not that all shouldn't be, but there are some departments, I'll just use schools as an example. We need to be sure that schools are gonna agree to that, reduction in their requested amount as well, because if they don't, then still maintain that 6%, that dollar amount has gotta get shifted somewhere else as well. So
Correct.
this could continue to be an ever-changing,
We've
even
been-
if we settle in on, our recommended percent that we wanna move forward with, it's no guarantee that these are actually the numbers. A lot of these can change continuously throughout this
you're correct.
process.
And we've been lucky to have a number of town meetings where there's been no differences with the selectmen, advisory, and departments.
Correct.
I
think
can't say that
gonna
that's
be
not gonna happen this year, because as
gonna
money
be
gets
harder
tight,
to
it does
guarantee
funny
this
things,
year.
so.
Yeah. Definitely
So-
think we all just need to keep that in mind. It's still, we can settle in, maybe give guidance tonight on a number, but that's still does not, mean that, we're giving set guidance on individual budget numbers.
That
Those
is
could still
correct.
change dramatically.
You're correct, yep.
Thank you, Brian, for the presentation. In looking at it, I like how you also said, you went through this with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, you guys are looking at $500 requests, $1,000 requests, those absolutely add up. So we owe it to the taxpayers to ensure that we're giving them the greatest amount of resources for the least amount of taxpayer spend. And I think this is a tough exercise, but something we've been doing every year, and I think you do it well. You also mentioned wants. I mean, there are wants and needs with every resident. There are wants and needs with every household budget. There are wants and needs with every town budget. And I think, we're in, what do we need? And I think there are responsible budgets and there are irresponsible budgets. I'm looking at, a 5% tax, rate that, to me, that would be irresponsible. I think there's a significant amount of reductions in there in services, in personnel. I think that would be irresponsible. I'm falling somewhere within the 6 to 7% range, which is what the guidance that I would recommend you continue to target in on. I get concerns on the 6% reduction with reduction to our school-age kids and their education. I think we have a responsibility to them. Anyone who has either had kids in the school system or currently does knows that too often there are drives being done for at home, hey, bringing in, materials needed for school. Now we even have, in the high school, there's a bring your own device requirement. So now there's more, requirements on families that otherwise didn't have $500 to spend on a device. Now they have to go, buy devices. So there's good reasons for that, educational reasons for that, but there's an impact to the homeowner, to the families, to the taxpayer. 7%, to me, somewhere within that 6 to 7% is where I'm coming from, and that's the guidance I would ask you to target. I do understand that the part of our capital plan that all of the recreation items that they previously were not in a capital plan are in the capital plan now, correct?
That's correct,
Which is
yes.
great.
Yep.
Do you
That's great.
expect any outliers to, any significant requests to come from any department at town meeting that is not reflective in these budgets? I mean, we had some of that last year, and I know that a lot of those good things that Recreation is looking to do are now in the capital plan, but those were outside of it last year, and they were different votes on town meeting floor that affected budgets. Do you expect anything like that this year?
I think we've got it in a good place. The school department, as you may know, is redoing their capital plan. I think they're in the midst of updating it. So that's always a helpful piece, just to see, even though they absorb it in their operating budget, which were funded out of their annual operating budget. It's great to know that their side of it too, because especially if there's a new roof or something large on those buildings that are not terribly old, but old enough now where you'd be, it seems like they were just built, right? But they are getting a little aged, so we're gonna get them updated, and then I think the capital plan will be in a good shape. I think we've drawn everyone in, we got the whole kit and caboodle, so no, I don't see it, I'm not aware of anything.
Okay. That's great. I think we owe it to our residents to ensure the public safety of our residents, so I'm in favor of continuing to fund our public safety budgets as needed, and our kids, and again, I think I'm in that 6 to 7% range. I'd like you to find some place within that.
DPW is a good example of, and you mentioned, I know you mentioned public safeties. I was thinking to myself how, obviously we know that that's a core departments that we want to try to maintain for obvious reasons. But the DPW is one of those departments that took a pretty big chunk of a hit if you look at their reduction, even in the 7%. So that's one of those departments we want to sit down with the town administrator, myself, and really the director, and go through and sort of have some give and take as to what she could realistically have reduced in that department, because unfortunately she had to bear a big burden somewhere. She's great, but I don't know what we may have to add back.
And I agree, and you mentioned the give and take. There are departments that gave last year.
Correct.
Who had legitimate requests, and we should not take from them this year.
Correct.
Library was one of them. I know we have a responsibility to make sure that those who had legitimate, good budget requests in there last year, we asked them to hold off for another year. They deserve to be funded. Madam Chair.
Just to be clear, I don't think there are any budget requests that are really not good budget requests. And we've had this conversation when we sat down with the departments. Those conversations are great, okay?
Yeah, they're just priorities.
And the things that the department heads want to do, and the vision they have on some of these things, and the way they want to address some of the issues that are facing their departments and facing the town and its residents are admirable, okay? And in a vacuum, all of that stuff makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm talking with library, I'm talking with youth and family, I'm talking with police, I'm talking with DPW, in a vacuum, looking at that budget, Brian and I can sit there and say, you know what? You've put some thought, you've put some effort, this all makes sense. The problem is when you put them all together into one bucket, it doesn't fit.
No, I think you're right.
And so you've got some projects. You pointed out library. There's capital that was deferred last year. That needs to be given consideration. You've got a failed culvert on Northborough Road that Karen was creative, 3 years ago? And she put a metal plate over the culvert, okay, and she paved over it. Do you notice it? No. It's held up for 3 years, right? It was supposed to be a one-year fix. We've got that in, that carries all the way through, all the percentages of that, because there are things that we do need to do. There are things that we need to address, regardless of the budget. Brian, was absolutely correct. We are a personnel-driven business, but there are infrastructure needs that we do need to, make sure we take care of to protect our investments.
Well said, Mr. Provo.
All right. I would just like to add that I agree, Mr. Klund. I think 5% is irresponsible, only because I look at as an overall, when I did my spreadsheet on salaries and what percentage of each department is salary, it's a high number. And through the SAP, Betsy, if I may, what is the agreed upon number for the increase? Is it 2.5? 2.5. So I look at what the public safety. Maximum, okay. Thank you. Thank you. So I look at, we're at 2.75 and then almost 1% for our capital items. And that takes us to 3.75. You add in just the personnel piece, and at roughly 80%, it puts you at 6. I don't know how we can sustain service to the taxpayers. So I am also in the 6 to 7% range, as much as I would love for it to be 5 and to be able to say to the taxpayers. But I think at the end of the day, it's an unsustainable number. And I think we need to be concerned with going forward as well, that increases such as this potentially are unsustainable for the citizens as well. And I think next year, we're going to have some tough decisions to make too. I think we need to get through this year. And again, I don't know what the long-term fix is gonna be. It's gonna be tough for everybody. But at the end of the day, I'm in the 5 to 6. I'm sorry,
5 to
6 to 7.
That's what I was
Sorry,
gonna
closer
say.
to the
I was gonna
6,
say, right.
but between the 6 and the 7.
Mhm.
Yeah, I wanted to speak.
Mr. Schifrin.
I lean toward 7. I think the cuts are too excessive below that. And with so in future years, I think we have to be at 7.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I don't think it should, I'm more comfortable with 6 to 6.5. This is only gonna snowball. If you don't make the cuts this year and we have employees, then you're looking at unemployment and all of the other things that go along with it. I don't think we wanna get there, to that position where we're gonna be making cuts that we're not gonna wanna make. Sorry. I thought you said 7. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't wanna get to 7. 6, 6.5.
So I'm glad I let you speak first, because that's kind of, the conversations that Brian and I have had. This is this is not a one-year fix, and then we can move forward and everything is gonna be fine next year, and, we're gonna get to do everything we want. We are still in the process, and Brian said it very well, of learning to absorb the public safety debt that has been approved by the voters, okay? And if you go back and look, and Brian likes to go back and look at our budget reports and look at the messages that we say at the end, our cautionary stuff, and most of it's been pretty good, and most of it's been pretty spot on. If we went forward with public safety, we're gonna have to look at some maintenance years where we're trying to bring the anchor down and maintain where we are and not lose some of that growth and the things that we've done in our departments to help them grow and do some of those things. That's where we are for the next couple of years. We enter this budget season with about $1.8 million in excess levy capacity. Depending on where we are, I think that if we end up around a 6.5, we're probably going to use about $600,000 roughly, about a third of that levy capacity in order to cover this budget. So we'll go into next year with about 1.2. If we have to start thinking of using that same amount of levy capacity, we'll be down to about 600,000 the year after. We're going to have trouble maintaining our bond rating, which, we got the AAA in order to help us with the interest rates so that we could get the best deal for a lot of this heavy bonding that we're doing at the public safety facility. We're going to end up in a position that we're going to have to start talking about potentially an operational override if we're not careful. And I really don't think that we want to get into that discussion, because that's a whole nother dynamic which can, be a rather unsavory discussion, to have. And I don't think we need to get there, but we need to make some of the difficult decisions now. So I appreciate the guidance that you've given tonight. That's understanding we want to try and preserve service levels, but we want to be cognizant of what that means. And so, unless unless I'm hearing wrong, I'm thinking that the board wants to be somewhere between that 6 and 7. And again, we can get to a number, say, we can probably, I told Brian earlier, I think we need to, if we want to be around 6.5, I think we need to work down towards 6.3, 6.2, because there are going to be those unknowns that are going to happen in January with the regional school numbers, with state aid. A lot of our local receipts are flat. Maybe motor vehicle excise will surprise us. Maybe the assessors will say, hey, you know what? We've got a little more new growth than we thought we did. Maybe there's a couple of things, but there's more things that could go the other way that we're not aware of yet. So I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of cushion so we're not scrambling the end of January, beginning of February to come forward with a final number between this board and between advisory.
Can I ask one question? On veteran services, Brian, I know we get reimbursement from the state and the federal government on benefits in that budget, probably about $40,000, I think. Do we set that aside for year to year so that it doesn't have to show on a recap as a 100% total?
Do we set the reimbursements
Yes.
aside?
How
No,
do
it
we
goes
allocate
into
the
the
reimbursements afterwards? Do
It
we
goes
get them
into-
in one lump sum, or do we get them month to month?
month to month. Yes. And they go into the general fund.
So we have to prepay,
Exactly. You have to prepay. Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, Mr. Shea.
Just confirming, you had mentioned that there were a couple of groups that had come in this year looking for new budgets to be
Correct.
added.
Correct.
Confirm, those are not included in this? Have
No.
that-
No, you may hear from them, though. I
Well,
suspect you
that's-
probably will.
Yeah.
And again, that's your purview, so,
But right now, the recommendation is
correct.
no new,
We couldn't, with a straight face,
no new,
put
no
a new budget in
budgets.
while we're,
And I agree with Mrs.
at least
Stanhope.
that's the way the town administrator and myself felt. If the board obviously weighs, I mean, that's your decision.
But again, at the end of the day, you're gonna have to decide what you want. So if Mr. Schifrin decides that we really need to fund a certain piece, Brian's sage advice is that, okay, the money's gonna go back in here, where's it coming out of?
Right.
In order to balance it. So you can't just say where you wanna take it, where you wanna put something in. You've also gotta have the balancing piece of it too. Or you just look at us and say, well, you gotta figure out where you wanna take it from. We
could
would
do that.
appreciate the whole approach, that, you know, we think we'd like to do this and move this thing around. For example, I know Mrs. Faniff has already mentioned, we've had a conversation in terms of tree removal in the DPW budget. And, you know, so in the conversations, when Brian and I sat down and did this, I said, you need to be cognizant of, you know, if we're looking at touching things in DPW, that you're not taking out a lot of the additional money that was put in for tree removal, because from some of the storms we've had, there's still a lot of tree removal work that needs to be done. So that does need to be addressed. So there are things like that, but again, if there are things you would like to see that may not be reflected in the budgets that are brought forward, it is helpful if you say, you know, we'd like to put this in here and we'd like to take it from here, just so we have an idea of what, you know, what the whole picture is gonna be.
Mark, when do you anticipate the next round coming through to the board, that we can actually see department by department and actually have a better snapshot based on the direction that you've been given tonight?
I mean, my opinion would definitely be sometime, one of the January meetings, it's gonna have to be.
Yeah,
I can't
would-
see realistically
yeah.
this month, so.
I would
No,
like
of
to
course
see, you
not,
know,
of
so
course
this is something, obviously, this is the priority, this is the front burner item. This is something I think that Brian and I are gonna begin on fairly immediately. Maybe we'll wait till tomorrow to start. But
Yeah.
I would hope that by the first meeting in January, we have had our discussions and are able to bring forward to you, you know, a preliminary, you know, a draft recommended budget based on the guidance that you've given us. And then that's something that we can begin to have the discussions, and I would expect the room to be full
Yeah.
at that
I
point.
think that
okay?
will be well
Now,
attended.
you know, either to
Fair
at
enough.
least illustrate the fact that they support what you want to bring forward, or there are things that didn't get included that people are going to want to advocate for.
Mrs. Faniff?
Can I make a suggestion that that meeting just be for the budget?
I'm fine with that. Or we schedule a separate meeting.
Well, however you want to do it, but it needs to be separate, and if advisory wants to join, or we send the invitation to the whole town. But I think it should be a separate meeting dedicated to this.
And I'll agree with Ms. Faniff, and I will suggest that if, you know, maybe even the January 2nd meeting is too long. If the work is done in advance of that, noting the tremendous pressures that have been put on advisory and others to come up with budgets in a very condensed time frame because of the new March meeting, that if we have to have a separate meeting as soon as the numbers are ready,
Yep.
I suggest we post that meeting and invite all those department heads to join us and have just a budget meeting.
Absolutely agree. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to remove my sick self from the meeting. I turn it over to Mr. Kalenda for the balance of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know how you do it, but well done. Hope you feel better soon. Okay. Thank you again, Mr. Ballantyne. No chairman's report. Town administrator report, Mr. Purple.
Mr. Kalenda, I have just one item. There was a conversation question which I believe you had asked, in terms of the possibilities of naming any of the space in the new public safety facility. And there was a memo that was provided to the board that was included in the packet, I believe, from Mr. Malinowski, that talked about the 3 spaces that were identified by the architect in the new public safety facility, which would be, I believe, the training tower, the dispatch area, and the training room, which were the areas that they would recommend. Now, the caveat is that in order for the signage and everything to be procured, along with the rest of the signage for the building, that information of naming any of those spaces would need to be provided back to the committee no later than January 15th. Unfortunately, that is only 2.5 meetings from now. The board has a naming policy, and there are certain procedures that you need to follow for that. And my opinion, I think it's a little rushed. I don't know that there's, I think that when you name something, it's forever. Subject to change always, but I think it's forever. And I think it may be something that the board wants to take a little bit of time. I can understand that you may want to have these things dedicated when the actual ribbon is cut, but something like that may take a little bit more time, and I'm not sure you've got enough time to go through the naming process and give the process its due, for the, for actually coming up with the names.
I think that's good advice. I mean, yeah, I did have the question. I wanted to see if it could be done in a reasonable amount of time. I don't want to rush something this important. If my other board members agree, maybe we take this up at a later time, but it's something that we should all be thinking of as to, possible naming for some of those parts of the new public safety facility, but maybe we just don't do it now. I don't know that we have the time.
I agree with
Sure,
that.
okay.
I would rather not rush into it, and we need to do it right, and we need to take the time to do it right.
Okay.
In my opinion.
All right. We have a number of consent agenda items. Before I go through A through H, is there any, would anyone like anything held?
G, please.
G, we'll hold G.
Mr.
And-
Chairman, I'm sorry, I just want to make one notation on F. I'm sorry, not on F, on E.
Mhm.
Pilot payment from Harvard Medical School, the actual number is 23,180.
Mhm.
So 22,615 is incorrect. It is 23,180.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Purple. Any other holds?
Are we holding the meetings, minutes?
We were not gonna hold those. We were gonna go do them.
January 25th, the executive session I don't have, and August 1st, the executive session minutes I don't have this evening.
So those were sent out a little bit later than usual, so you've probably not had time to review those. So if you wanted to defer those to the 12/18
Yes,
agenda,
I would. I haven't
Okay.
read them.
So
that's
we'll
what we
hold.
can, we can table January 25 and the August 1 executive session.
That's what I
Yes.
heard.
Okay, all right.
Okay, anything other than that?
Some of the meeting minutes, because of the dates,
Mhm.
the quorum of that board isn't present this evening, so do we approve them?
That's okay. Yeah, we're just approving the
Yes,
release
you
of the
can
minutes.
still, yes, you can approve
Okay.
those minutes.
I'm fine with them
Anything
all.
else? Any other holds? Okay. All right, so then I will move, before I read through them, that we accept items A, B, C, D, E, F, and H. Is there a second?
Second.
A as modified.
A is
the two
modified,
holds.
correct. We are holding those two.
And E is modified.
And E has already been modified by Mr. Purple. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, and I thank Mr. Purple and the town to continue to go through meeting minutes to ensure that they are all summarized and released in a timely manner.
Yes, so just to clarify, since you made that point, Mr. Kalenda, so, obviously there was an open meeting law violation that was submitted, and the Attorney General's office did find, that the board had some minutes that were recently approved that were not done timely, according to the AG's office. So we undertook a review back through 2016 to ensure that we hadn't missed, what things that we may have missed. A lot of the things were, and this reflects the majority, one of the things that we found was, these were the one-off meetings. These were the meetings that were held the night of town meeting, certain things like that. So, we understand that in all likelihood, a similar open meeting law violation, will be filed simply because we are playing catch-up on some of this stuff. But I think it's a dereliction of responsibility if we know about these and we don't address them, understanding that the likely response is going to be another open meeting law violation. And we'll, work with the AG's office to try and, and have a reasonableness test on that. We understand that, that they weren't done timely. However, we're trying to correct that now and can then say with the level of certainty that, that the minutes have been brought current.
No, thank you, Mr. Purple. I mean, we are a group of volunteers. The town runs by some great dedicated public servants who are full-time and a lot of public servants who are part-time at best. So everyone does their best to ensure that these things are done properly and on time. Thank you for that. So we'll approve then the minutes designated in A, and then B, we're going to approve the revocable license for 145 to 156 Northborough Road to install a stormwater management facilities within the layout of the public road, accepting a donation of $250 from Ms. Louise Donahue to the Southborough Library donation account. Very appreciative of her contribution. Accepting 1,150 client donations for Southborough Youth and Family Services donation account. Again, very much appreciated. And also the pilot payment of $23,180 from Harvard Medical School. We're going to assign the OML complaint to town council as standard practice. We're holding G, and we're going to appoint John Wood to Southborough Housing Opportunity Partnership Committee for a term ending on 6/30/21. We appreciate Mr. Wood's continued service to his town. It's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Anything on G you want to talk about, Ms. Fana?
It's posted in our packet, and the date on it was presented to the Board of Selectmen 12/4/18 for the audience. Has the police chief weighed in on any of these? Did he have a concern with any of them?
No, so the department, so one of the requirements, especially for the liquor licenses, is that the building commissioner as well as the fire department need to go out and inspect all of the establishments. And so that has been done. There are, I think the caveat with the list is that obviously no license is going to be released until, if there's a tip certification that needs to be done, obviously if the license needs to be paid for before it's released, things like that. We have all but I think 4 or 5 licenses. So at the meeting on the 18th, we try to bring them all forward the first meeting in December to the extent we have them ready. And then at your next meeting, there'll just be a cleanup meeting for the other 4 or 5 that are outstanding, and we should be in pretty good shape to have that done.
Okay, so they satisfied the town inspector.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then I would move G, that we accept the annual renewals for alcohol Class 1, Class 2, common vitular, entertainment, and amusement licenses for 2019 in our list. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, takes us to other matters. We're going to authorize board members for negotiation of purchase and sale agreement for Fayetteville Hall. Mr. Purple?
So.
Yeah, Mr. Clinton, before I start,
Yeah.
I'm going to need to recuse myself
okay.
from discussion on this matter.
All right, why don't we, you want to hold on that one and do the other
You want
two?
to flip the other 2?
Sure.
All right, so why don't we go to bid results for Animal Control Officer recommendation of contract award. Mr. Purple?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, there is information in your packet. The bid came due for the animal control services. We did receive only one bid from Boardman's Animal Control, who is currently providing the service and has provided the service for a number of years. And the bid price is very similar to the price we're currently paying, so we're really not going to see much of an increase. I've spoken with the chief, we really don't get, very many, if any, complaints. They do provide services to a number of communities, and I would recommend that the bid be awarded to Boardman Animal Control to continue providing the services that they currently provide to the town.
All right, so I'll start the discussion by making a motion that we approve, that we appoint Boardman's Animal Control. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we have a town manager review committee charge. The board asked me to take a look at drafting a charge, which I have done. If folks haven't had an opportunity to look at it, I'd love to know your thoughts and then see if it's something that we might move forward with. So, discussion.
Sure. So I have gone through it. I don't have comments at this time, other than, when we had discussed it at in the fall, as part of our goal-setting meeting, we had thought that to try and do this for May of 2019 was gonna be too aggressive. My opinion is that still is too aggressive, particularly where, we're already into December, we don't have a committee formed. I think that if we're gonna be targeting a annual town meeting of 2019, we really ought to have this much further along than what it is, unfortunately. And I think that we ought to be in consensus building mode at this point, holding meetings. So I'm in favor of continuing with it. I just think that the schedule we have is aggressive.
And for other comments, I won't disagree with that. My thought is we get it going, and it may not be ready for this upcoming town meeting, and if not, that's okay.
Yep.
But we have, at least the charge has them until June 30, 2019. If there's a special meeting that may come up, it could be ready for that. If the work is done, it could be socialized throughout the summer and into the fall, and then be ready with hopefully consensus, for the next annual town meeting. So that's my only thought is, unless we have an actual committee, we're not moving forward with anything. So that's why I still think we could form it and see what they can do. I think my presumption is there's a lot in what was previously done that is good stuff, and there are things that we know, for instance, the town clerk is gonna be an elected position. That was a matter of some contention last time. That's gonna be modified in the next draft. I bet you, my own thought is there's probably gonna be more agreement than less going forward, and that if we start a committee and they can get their work done, great. If not, at least we'll be well on the way. That's my thought.
I
Ms.
did
Vaniff?
read it. Could we have another week just to send our
Absolutely.
edits to
Absolutely.
Mark, and he can either adapt them
Yep.
into the, or
Yep, that'd be
use
great.
it as a suggestion?
That'd be great.
So I would suggest, as you just said, Mrs. Faniff, that the comments come only to me. I'll compile a document, and then the board can then have that document to review at the meetings. We want to make sure there's no open meeting law issues.
All right. Anything further on that one?
Thank you
All
for
right,
your
excellent. All right, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Mr. Shea? Okay. We'll let you move on and. All right. Okay. All right, and next we have, we're going to authorize board members for negotiation of purchase and sale agreement for Fayetteville Hall. Mr. Purple.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kalenda, however we should refer to you. So, the issue, at the last meeting, the board unanimously voted to award the bid for the sale of Fayetteville Hall to to First Colony, and per the bid document, council needs to work with the proposer to put together the purchase and sale. That document needs to be done within the first 30 days. However, as you remember from our discussion in the St. Mark's deal for the golf course, the initial purchase and sale was done fairly quickly. However, the final version looked a lot different than the initial version, simply because there were things that are identified, there were additional things that were added in, and responsibilities that were assigned. My rationale for putting this on was for the board to have a discussion as to whether or not there were any members who wanted to participate along with town council as part of those negotiations, as Mr. Shea and Mr. Rooney did along with myself and town council when it came to St. Mark's. The board may feel comfortable in just allowing town council to do that, and to work things through him, through discussions that the board may have in executive session as it relates to the property. Or you may decide that you want to put a member or two to sit with town council to be part of those discussions firsthand. Again, Ms. Braccio isn't here this evening. Mr. Shea has to recuse himself. So, and Mrs. Faniff is pointing that way.
So I am as well. I think Mr. Schiffman would be ideal, especially with your background, sir. Do you need more than one?
That is completely up to you.
'Cause I also think the chair, this is a significant event, and maybe the chair would like to also participate in that, but she's not here to say yes.
This is what happens when people aren't here.
That's right,
They get
so-
appointed to
But
things.
I suggest we start with Mr. Schifrin for sure, and then would people be adverse? I mean, I would like to rather see Ms. Braccio. So if she would be willing to do that and a second is needed, I think the guidance would be Mr. Schifrin and Ms. Braccio if she's willing and able. All right. Do we need a formal vote on that?
I think a formal
All right,
vote would be
It's
good.
been seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? All right. Okay. All right, you good?
That's all I have.
All right. And before we go to public comment, just a reminder for anyone who wants to make public comment, it's a time when town residents can bring matters before the Board of Selectmen that are not on the official agenda. We do have these posted for all boards and committees. Comments should be short and to the point, and remarks must be respectful and courteous, free of rude, personal, or slanderous remarks. And the guidelines go on for a couple pages, but if anyone has any questions on that, feel free to ask us. If not, public comment, please.
Louise Barron, 11 Sadie Hut Lane. I brought this cheap but meaningful to me little sign because this board, like this town, has been spending like drunken sailors. And according to Mr. Ballantyne, we're in trouble. We're not in the black, let's put it that way. So when do we stop? We need to stop spending. We need to put a moratorium on hiring. I think Mrs. Faniff suggested that. We need to not give any more increases in salaries. And if the town manager, and you feel we need a town manager, that should be postponed. We can't afford it. I don't know what are the benefits of a town manager as opposed to a town administrator. Could anybody clue me in?
We don't have a discussion back and forth on public comment. There'll be, the pros and cons of anything will be part of any public meeting that
This is a public meeting, Mr. Kalenda.
Any part of, let me finish. That'll be part of any public meeting that committee then holds. But we're not going to have a back and forth discussion during public comment.
I'm not asking for, I just want to know
Just
what
ask the question. We don't have that during public comment.
I see, okay, very good. And you said you're just volunteers, and you've,
Ms. Faniff?
Putting a committee together, Louise, to review the benefits. So that's what this
microphone if you would.
I'm sorry, we're putting a committee together, that was the earlier discussion, to look at the benefits for the community, for a future discussion at a town meeting. It has nothing to do with this upcoming town meeting.
Yeah, okay. And the next thing I want to say is, you said that you were just merely volunteers, and I appreciate that. But you've still broken the law with open meeting law. And that is not the best you can do. And when you say that, this is the best we could do, I know, it's not easy to be volunteers in town. But breaking the law is breaking the law.
So, ma'am, if you want to slander town officials who are doing their very best,
I'm not slandering.
then we're going to go ahead and stop the public comment session now.
Look, you need to stop being a
and go into
Hitler.
recess.
You're a Hitler.
All right, we are moving
I can say what I want.
into recess. Thank you.